I'm Dean Cifola, and this is the Azure Academy. In our last video in our automation series, we looked at building out a nested and linked template application. Now we want to take that one step further again. So now we're going to be building the basis of an enterprise. I'm going to create a new set of resource groups based on a prefix of ZX9. So currently we have no resource groups with that, and I'm going to show you how we're going to get there. So I've written a function in PowerShell, and what this function does is basically going to build out for us all of this stuff. So I'm going to kick this off, and the way I do that is just by running this command. So all of this will be all that we need to build out everything, and then it's going to prompt me to enter a password for my local admin password on all my VMs. And then part of the remote desktop services farm uses a Azure PaaS service called Azure SQL. And so I'll put in a password for that. And that'll start the build. Okay, so all of our stuff is finished building from our PowerShell script. And here's what we got. A bunch of resource groups. And currently, most of these are empty. So there's our one for our VNets, our shared services, and this is the one for our application, identity, disaster recovery, and security. And security has resources built in it from PowerShell already. We've got ourselves a KeyVault, so let's take a look at that real quick. And so we've got a secret here for our local admin password that we'll reference in our ARM templates, and one for SQL. And then we have our access policies, which gives me the right to look at these things. And these boxes get checked so that we can deploy them with our ARM templates. And then we have a storage account that we built out for staging some of our stuff. And that's here in the blobs. And I've got some PowerShell DSC that we'll be using, as well as some basic scripts. Okay, so that's what we've got over there. And let's go to our solution here. So this is, of course, Visual Studio, and this should hopefully look very familiar by this point. So you can see we've got a bunch of different resources here, which will be doing linked templates and nested templates for doing our build out of our base environment here. And the way I've got this set up is with quite a lot of parameters. So all of these parameters that have the numbers, they directly correspond to the resources with conditions. And the condition says that if I select build, deploy number 1 backup vault, then it will build a backup vault. And if I say build and deploy a virtual network, it'll build a network. Now I've numbered them because you cannot build out number 2s or number 3s without building out number 1s. Okay, so there's a inline dependency here. And this is a good time too to bring up some of the other things that you should have as you're building your code out, and that would be things like a README file. So the README should tell people what it is that you're doing and anything that they need to know in building it out. So for example, I say here that this is a master template and going to do several link templates to deploy all of these different resources. Then I go into some of the description of what everything is in the parameters, how I'm building out the virtual networks. We'll be getting a hub and a spoke, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And we'll have NSGs applied to all of our subnets. And then we'll have VMs will all have one NIC and all have at least one data disk. And our domain controllers will be deployed with 2 domain controllers being highly available. And that'll be deployed through PowerShell desired state configuration. And then we have distributed file servers, or DFS, and that will deploy a DFS namespace as well as DFS replication. And that will also be used as the platform for which our user disks for our remote desktop services farm will live. And that farm itself will be constructed of 2 connection brokers with a highly available Azure SQL database, 2 web access servers, 4 session host servers, and that'll be built out with PowerShell DSC and some scripts. So that's what we're going to be building. And so let's take a look at what we have when we try to deploy. Okay, so now we'll select our resource group, and you could really select any resource group, it doesn't matter, but I'm going to select my application workload resource group. And then we'll say this is our Azure deploy and our parameters, and we will hit edit properties. Now, These things have red indicators because there is no value provided, and there needs to be. Okay, so that way I've forced you to have to answer a bunch of questions when you go to deploy this. So the first thing is our prefix, and that was ZX9 to correspond to what we have in our Azure portal. Okay, and admin password. So we'll hit our little button, and then we get our KeyVault, ZX9 KeyVault, and we want this as the built-in local admin password. And then we have another one here for SQL. So we'll do that again. Okay, and the username, any username you like, and I'll be using passwords. I won't be needing a SSH key, and I already have some stuff here for backups. These are backup policies, and I'll say that I am, actually I spelled HIPAA wrong. I will say that I am PCI compliant in this environment, and since we're building out a domain, I want to give it a fully qualified domain name, so I give you the choice of what domain extension you're going to use, and actually let's make this .org. Sure, why not? And if you have appropriate Windows licensing with software assurance, you can select the Windows Server in your hybrid use benefit. And then just like in our last video where I specified the first 2 octets of the IP address, I'm going to want to have a range here. So I'll say 172.16. And the location that I built this out in is going to be East US 2 and West US 2. And that also corresponds to my location and DR location. And then we need a SQL username. So we'll say SQL admin. And now we have some tags. So I give you the ability to write tags. So we'll say here web demo and a cost center so we know who's paying for this. We'll say ZX9 dash whatever money, and our department, this will be our app depot. And then what kind of environment is this? And this is going to just be a test environment. And now we come to the fun part. So am I going to build out a backup vault? Why, yes I am, so that would be true. Am I going to build a key vault? Nope, because I already have one. How about site recovery? Not this time. I'll need a virtual network, I'll need storage, and I am not going to deploy any of my Cisco or Palo Alto firewalls this time. I will need Active Directory and a DFS farm, RDS, and I will not deploy the workload at this time, nor will I deploy an ExpressRoute or VPN at this time. So that's basically the way that our deployment's going to look. And I will hit save here, and I will kick off the deployment. However, while this is going on, we're going to use this opportunity to walk through some of the code while it's building. So like in our last video, we're using our variables section to catch a lot of what we're having specified in our parameters. And here are some of the references to the scripts that we'll be using. And we have our remote desktop services configurations, our DFS server configurations, and these are all just links going to our storage account, that staging storage account that we already deployed everything to. And I've uploaded all of this code already. And same thing for our DSC. It's all just uploaded. And then we have our templates, and this is for all of our links templates. So let's look at this one here. And so it's going by the artifact location, since we're uploading this to an Azure storage account, referencing in our nested templates folder over here to the core. So inside our virtual network, this should all look very familiar, but this one is a little new. So we're going to be peering our hub and spoke networks together so that they can communicate. Now, a peer is where we have 2 separate networks, and we link them together in routing to say that this network and the other network can communicate with each other, because virtual networks by themselves are an isolation boundary. Now we just looked at our virtual network template, so let's look at what that looks like as a resource. Okay, so it looks just like we did last time. We have a link going to that template, which is our guy over here. And then we're passing parameters to him from the tags that we had entered, our IP address, our location, And so it pretty much looks like what we did last time. We're just doing a whole lot more of it. So here's our storage account. Now, this storage account takes as an input the output of our virtual networks for the hub and the spoke. So why are we doing that? Let's look at the storage. So inside our storage account, we have the ability to create network ACLs. And this basically says that we have a firewall in place to isolate the storage account from the internet and from all networks. Then we add to it subnets that are allowed to talk to it. Okay, moving on. After we're doing that, then we're going to be building out our domain controllers. Now, here's where things start to get really interesting. Now, one of the other characteristics you can see here in our deployment is that we're sending our deployment to another resource group. So we have a condition that says if I checked true in the parameter for deploying Active Directory, then it will deploy. And additionally, I've made this dependent on the storage account template going first. So if I select both of them to be true, I want that one to go first so I have a storage account for monitoring set up for my VMs. And then I'm deploying this template into another resource group. So we have our storage accounts being built out in the security resource group, and then the domain controllers are being built out in the identity resource group. And besides that, it's pretty much the same. There's our link for our template and the parameters that we are passing in, one of which is the hub. And that's because I'm going to put my shared services, my domain controllers, file servers, etc., into my shared services hub network, and then my application will go in the spoke network. Okay, and then we're also passing in values for updating our DNS. So once our domain controllers are deployed, they will be providing DNS. So we're going to flip our Azure Virtual Network to use custom DNS. And then we're also going to be building a linked template within a linked template. So let's take a look at what that is. And this basically looks exactly like the virtual network template that we saw earlier, with one minor exception. And that's over here. So inside our virtual network, we're adding this option to specify our DNS servers. Okay, and that's how we're going to customize our DNS. Now, what makes it, of course, a domain controller is the fact that we are doing some additional work inside the system after it's built. So that additional work, of course, is that we're using PowerShell desired state configuration, and we're passing it a bunch of values, and then that will stand up a domain controller. Now, once that's done, we're going to go on to building our second domain controller, because these are going to be highly available. All right, then we're going to be building out our DFS servers, and this will again look very, very similar, pretty much identical to building out what we had before. So you can see a lot of these design patterns are the same, and that way I can reuse them as quickly as possible. So even if I'm not reusing the exact code, I'm reusing my patterns. Okay, so that way I can write things a lot faster. So same kind of stuff. Now here's the one unique thing. Now that we have our domain stood up, now we want to join systems to that domain. So we have an extension for that in Azure, and this is how you would write that. DFS servers will get built, they'll get joined to Active Directory, and then once they are joined to Active Directory, then we're kicking off a custom script extension, and this is going to build out our two servers as DFS servers. And then we move on to our remote desktop services. And this is how we're going to set up our jump servers for the environment. Again, going to a different resource group, and it basically looks the same. Now here we're adding a few other things, and these are for other scripts that we need to build out that environment as well. Okay, now this one, a lot more stuff to build out because RDS has a lot of roles. Now here's a resource that we haven't looked at before, and I know I'm going through everything really quick here, but there's a massive amount of stuff here, as you can see. This is our Azure SQL build. So the way Azure SQL works, this is a PaaS service, and we're going to build out our Azure SQL server, which is basically a Azure managed server. And then on top of that, we're deploying a database, and we're going to deploy some firewall rules so that we can securely communicate with that database. Okay, so kind of like building SQL Server, except it's in the cloud, so there's other benefits. It's scalable, it's dynamic, costs me less than running just a VM, and I only need a little tiny database, because all this is going to do is talk to my connection brokers to figure out who's actually the quote-unquote active guy. And then if one goes down, the connections are maintained so that things don't drop. And then we have our same join the domain extension. And then we get into the extensions to build out our RDS farm. Now, some of this is desired state configuration, and the rest of it is being done through scripting. Okay, so there's a bunch of different steps that happen, and there's really way too much to go into for all of that detail. A lot of stuff, and this will all be posted onto my GitHub page. So once we do that, now we come to the part where we're ready to look at that application that we built out the last time. Now this, you'll notice, is pretty much kind of generic, okay? And that's because I don't know what workload my customer is going to want to build. So I keep that in a separate folder. Now here's the workload. All it is taking the input parameters I know I'm going to need in this environment to build something. The rest of it is blank. Okay, so here's where we could add those other templates that we had and make this one contiguous deployment, or you can use this infrastructure that I've got here to build out the basic environment, and then separately you can go and deploy your application environments in the spokes. With that, I think we're done building, so let's take a look. So here's all the resource groups. So in this resource group, we've deployed a hub and spoke virtual network. Now, what exactly is a hub and spoke? Well, let's look at our Azure documentation. So here we're going to go to architectures and reference architectures, and then down here a little bit we're going to go to either hub and spoke over here or over here. This one's more relevant to our discussion because we have shared services such as Active Directory involved. So let's click on this. So essentially what we're doing, this is our on-premise connecting by ExpressRoute or VPN, in our case VPN, up to the Azure Academy. And then from there, we are peering to our hub for our application that we just deployed in ZX9. Okay, so think of this like a shared services type hub, or a hub for a hub, and then a hub, hub, and spoke. So you could design it any way that meets your particular requirements. So we have our hub network and the hub peerings. We have one that goes back to the Azure Academy and one that goes to the new spoke that we just created. And if we go to the spoke, then we see that we have only got a connection back to the hub. Okay, so the spoke talks to the hub. The hub allows communication from the spoke and back to the Azure Academy. And then the Azure Academy allows communication back from there. And then we have our VPN connection that goes back to our on-premise. So we also built out some domain controllers. And here's our two domain controllers. Now they're in a separate resource group for the purposes of isolation. So we can control who has access to these resources in this resource group, simpler than it would be to just stick them all in one resource group and then we have to have each resource have rules for itself. We can just do it all at the resource group level. So all these resources are just for the identity folks. And then if I hit this show hidden types, you can see here we've got two configurations that are applied. One is for creating our primary domain controller, one creates our secondary domain controller, and those were done through PowerShell DSC. And then we have our security, and this is where our monitoring storage account is. That's monitoring all of our virtual machines. We have a Azure Backup Vault and our KeyVault. And then we had our staging storage account and that one for future network virtual appliances should we need any. And then in shared services, we have a lot of stuff. So this is where we have two servers that are our distributed file servers. And these could also be used for something like Azure File Sync, which we'll get to in another series when we talk about storage in depth. And then we've also got a Azure SQL server and an Azure SQL database. and we're using that as a high availability connection source for our remote desktop infrastructure. And we've got 2 connection brokers, 1 license server, 4 session hosts, and 2 web access servers. So let's take a look inside our systems now, so we can see what we've got. So this is my on-prem domain controller, and this will be connected to Azure Academy's resource group in the cloud. And you can see here my on-prem IP addresses. I have my internal IP address of 192.168.166.4, and then my external, which goes out to the world at 10.10.10.33. And then we have in this environment, I've got a couple DFS servers that are currently sitting on my domain controllers. Not exactly best practice, but small environment. And then I've got a bunch of IP addresses in my DNS, and they're all in the 192.168 range and some local stuff. And then from here, let's look at our companion Active Directory server for Azure Academy's resource group. And up in the cloud, we're at 192.168.0.5. And then separately, we have our new hub and spoke environment, the ZX9 environment. And that environment, I have to use a jump server. So right now I'm using one of my Azure Academy servers as my jump host. And I'm jumping now into my new ZX9 environment. So here's the ZX9 domain controller on 172.16. This is over my virtual network peer. And you can see this is azureacademy.org instead of .com, so separate domain. And in this domain, here's my DNS. 172.16 is for everybody. Okay, and these are not the same servers with 2 IP addresses. This is a totally separate environment, totally not related to Azure Academy. And then I have in here, I have DFS servers. These are the ones I just showed you in the cloud that we provisioned. And in there, we also provisioned through our onboarding script a namespace and a share. And that share is just here for future use of our RDS servers using things like user provisioned disks. And then we also have our RDS farm that we've provisioned. So all this was done through my ARM template, PowerShell DSC, and scripting. So I didn't touch anything. Okay, this is the beauty of what you can do in templates. Basically everything. Okay, so I've built out here the equivalent to the foundational shared resources of an enterprise so that we can provision out our stuff ready to deploy our workloads. And here's the web interface for RDS, and notice 172.16. And I'll log in with my Azure Academy credentials, which could be single sign-on or pass-through authentication. And we're in, and of course I've only got, a default test app of Calculator, but it all works. So this is what you can do with ARM templates, and all this out of our deployment here came from all of these templates that I've got here: PowerShell, PowerShell DSC, scripting of ARM templates through nested and linked resources, and this is just the beginning. You can take it anywhere from here. So of course we could go on endlessly with this series, but I think this is a good place to stop for now. So thanks very much for joining us on this automation journey through ARM templates. Want to know what other things you guys are interested in? I've got some other ideas for things, but I want to hear from you. So do me a favor and hit that like button if you thought that this was a pretty cool video or a cool series, and hit that notification bell so you can get subscribed and get our videos as soon as they drop, which is usually about once a week or so. And let me know in the comments what other things you guys are interested in. Don't be afraid to type. It's okay. I won't bite you much, I promise. All right, so thanks very much, guys, for joining me. Happy learning.